Hello, and welcome to React Components. So I have some ideas for what I want to talk about, but I want to see how far we got yesterday. So let's do a brain dump. I would like you to take 4 minutes and Slack me everything you know about components in particular. React components, component hierarchies, anything componenty. What the fuck is a component? You go to a party full of losers and they go, oh, you're doing those components? What even is a component? What are you going to tell them? Brain dump, 4 minutes, go. Another minute or so. All right, slack it on in. Show me what you got. Great. Good work, everybody. So I'm still copying down your things. In teaching terms, what I'm doing right now is called a gallery, because I want you to see each other's responses. Go ahead and start reading. Okay. Cool. So, some themes. Saw the word reusable come up a lot. But components don't have to be reusable, they often are. I like this one up here about components being made up of components, just components all the way down. So we'll call that hierarchies, components that are made up of other components. Modular. It's not quite the same thing as reusable. Modular is like decomposed. Container. I like that word. I see some state and props. So can be given properties and can have state. Cool. Oh, that's true. something I didn't see, I might have missed it, but something I didn't see in your responses, and you can be forgiven for this because the React community does not like this metaphor, but it is super true, is that a component is like a custom HTML element. So think about how, maybe we have a heading. All right, so I have this H1, this is Flatiron School. I could turn that into a component. It says like Flatiron heading. So what would be the advantage? You can tell me an advantage of turning this H1 into a component.
It become, go ahead, Brian.
Kyle.
I was just going to say it could become dynamic.
It could, it's not. It's literally just replacing this code with this code. Ultimate outcome is exactly the same.
Organization.
Yeah, way easier to organize stuff because rather than saying like what something is, or sorry, rather than saying like how something should work, take two H1 tags and put this string in it. I'm saying what something is. That's a much easier way to organize stuff. I like it. Anything else?
It kind of goes back to that reusable factor.
Anything else needs to use that? I can use that same component everywhere. And this isn't the same as something being dynamic, but at one point, this was called the Flatiron School, like the Facebook. And so, all right, let's say Adam Enbar gets a hair up his ass, wants to change it back to the Flatiron School. Cool. We can change it in that one component, and everywhere that's using the Flatiron heading thing, we dried it up. We moved it to one place. We turned this into a custom element.
Is it kind of the difference in being declarative?
Mm-hmm. So like in this example, yeah, we took something imperative and made it declarative. Let's do another example. So you could have an input in a form. Great example of what we're doing. And it's a search thing. So it's got a little magnifying glass over here. Maybe it has like type your query. Has that little placeholder text. And so we would code that up by making an input tag and say placeholder is whatever. I say the value of it, whatever. Cool. So if I wanted it to have this thing, this little magnifying glass in it, all right, well then I need to have that like font awesome icon. So it's like FA search. These need to be wrapped in something. So it might be better to make that a span. So we got the actual input, then maybe I absolutely position this glass inside of that. I put some padding around that div. So I can have all of that, or I can say search box, something like that. Now, here's the rub though. I still have some of these attributes that I want to be able to set on it, right? So I still might want to be able to say, well, the placeholder is search it. And I still want the value. I still need to be able to read that value out somehow. Maybe I want this icon to not have to be a magnifying glass. Maybe I want that icon to be whatever I want it to be. But I want the fact that the icon is set in the box this particular way. I just want to encapsulate all of that kind of stuff. So I make a search box component that does all that instead. So now it's just like the WhatWG, that's the HTML government. They go, hey everybody, we have a new HTML element we're so happy to introduce to you. It's called search box. Components are being able to make those yourself. Now, an input is also a great example because this value changes, doesn't it? Who can tell me what that's an example of?
So is that
State.
State. Thank you, Jay. What were you going to say, Lynn?
also state?
Yes. Yeah, that like an HTML input tag has state to it. Starts out as empty. You type a character. Well, that changes the state from empty value to whatever character you typed. It's always updating that value. That's the state of the input. Okay. Well, your components can have state also, just like that. Ask me some questions about this idea of custom elements.
Why does the React community not like that phrase?
Because they don't like the DOM. This is fucking infuriating to me. I think it's a little bit of functional programming purism, because they also like the way that React does events is different than every other component framework. Most components will let you make custom events. React won't. Because that community, by and large, didn't like how events in the DOM worked. So they've tried to steer away from that, but I still think it's the simplest way to understand what components are and is completely intellectually accurate. Or you could go, hey, they're a function that returns out. It's custom element.
Are there any hoops to jump on styling, or does it act just the same?
100% the same. So if I have this search box component and this is the code for it, this is still the code for it. This is still what actually gets rendered to the page. My browser doesn't know what a search box element is. So for people who are in the morning lesson where we talked about NPM and, Node and just using programming with these like templating languages and JSX and stuff, it's like a search and replace. Everywhere it sees one of these search boxes, it just replaces it with one of these. And so you'd style it the exact same way you'd style one of these. More questions about components as custom elements.
For the most part, are components going to be returning some kind of element, or do they sometimes do other things as well?
Always going to return an element. Now, one of the things you can do, if you make it through the program without having ever done one of these, you're fine. But you can pass components into components also. And so an example of that would be, I have a shared wrapper, but instead of this input being part of the component, it's a little placeholder that goes, oh, and anything you pass into me, I'll put in there also. And then instead of this being single-ended, it becomes double-ended. Don't worry about it. Yes, every component returns an element.
Would you want to do that if you were like trying to populate like a card container with cards or something like that? Or would that be a different use case scenario?
I'm going to say that the use case for that is pretty advanced. There's probably no reason to do it in mod 4 even. It might come up in your capstones a little bit. But like, there's nothing that you can't do without it. It just can save you some code sometimes. So yeah, for now, I just think of all components as single-ended. Be a healthier place to start. So we mentioned that the components can have components, can have components, can have components. We actually see a little bit of this in regular HTML already. We have forms. And those forms have inputs. Like that. Button or input type submit or whatever. But this has a behavior. When this button gets clicked, the form submits. That's like an example of two of these things kind of talking to each other. We can also do custom behavior like that. When such and such action is taken on this component, fire off this function. We can do that with components also. So they can encapsulate things. They can have state, like inputs do, and they can have behavior, like forms do. Custom elements. Questions?
This is kind of an off question, but does this eliminate the use of add event listeners?
Yes, it does. You will never use add event listener in React. And in fact, you'll never interact directly with the DOM in any component framework. So no document.querySelector, no document.createElement, no element.addEventListener. At an abstract level, the reason that all this shit started was in part so we have the code and we have the DOM. So we have the thing that we wrote and we have the thing that's actively running in the browser. That's the DOM. It turns out that changing the DOM is fucking expensive. It's okay. So like I've said this over and over again, network requests are the slowest part of your app. Always the slowest part of your app. The second slowest thing is updating the DOM. So what React really pioneered was this abstraction called the virtual DOM. And what our code does is all we do is interact with this virtual DOM. And the virtual DOM's job is to figure out if and when the actual DOM actually needs to change. And if it does need to change, how much of it needs to change. So this is what's right under the hood on React, but that means we don't get to end run around it. We don't get to directly interact with the DOM anymore. All we can do is interact with the virtual DOM. So we don't get add event listener. We can't create elements. We can't do any of that stuff. We have to do that through the virtual DOM.
I'm sure it's like an entirely different lesson, but what's the alternative to event listeners?
Like the VDOM has an equivalent idea. You actually end up putting it directly in the JSX. So instead of like add event listener, click this function on the element itself, you say on click equals this function.
Which you can kind of do that in regular HTML, right?
It looks like the regular HTML syntax, but it works differently. But yeah, that's where they got the idea from.
So they already had the on-click for HTML, and then they just added that to React. Okay.
Sort of. It like gave it a slightly different behavior. And you can do that with basically any DOM event. You do like on scroll, whatever, like anything on submit, anything that fires an event. You handle that through JSX. There's no like add event listener.
So I'm just gonna briefly skim something about the three pillars, the encapsulation, polymorphism,
Mhm.
and is that related to components like this?
No, look, good pickup though, because like, yeah, like this as encapsulation is the same thing in like a lot of ways as those like OOP pillars. I would not say otherwise it directly applies to this, especially with React. We see a little bit more of that like OOP pillars thing in some of the other frameworks, especially Ember. But React actually leans a lot more to the functional programming side of things as far as like these component frameworks go. So same vocab words, slightly different usage. Actually, let's hang on that for just a sec. Who can tell me what encapsulation in the OOP sense? What does that mean?
Isn't it that only that it can only see itself, it can't see outside of it anything else?
That's a part of it. It's not the big part though. There's two things that get bundled together because of encapsulation.
State and behavior.
State and behavior. Keeping state and behavior together, and then how do we access state in OOP?
Through behavior.
Through behavior. That's encapsulation, the OOP idea. encapsulation, like this example that I gave right here, is I'm hiding the implementation details of this away behind this. This is probably a better example of the OOP abstraction principle. But these things do, like in the case of this form, they do bundle together state and behavior. There is some Venn diagram overlap between these ideas too. Like, for example, OOP has encapsulation, inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction. Those are 4 pillars of OOP. For FP, abstraction and polymorphism are also like a little bit part of that. Not encapsulation, definitely not inheritance, but and it does both of these things differently, but it still values them. Something to think about. All right, back on track. Other questions about this idea of components as custom elements? All right, let's practice a little bit. So what I want you to do is use Create React App, make a new app. It's going to take a second, so do it right now. And then we can talk about what we're going to do with it while that's going. Doesn't matter what we call it. I'm going to call this one, for example, some other React app. Create React App, some other React app. And I am going to take some raw HTML and I'm going to show you how to turn that into components, and then you're going to do the rest of it. So how about we take Firebase? Let's take one of these pages. Let's see, copy outer HTML. This will be interesting. I'm curious to see if this actually works. All right, so I'm going to go into some other React app. I'll pull up the app.js component. I'm going to replace all of this with all this. And it's not going to like several parts of this. Let's see if I can at least just get some of it in here. This is like one of the first problems you're going to run into in React. Why is it so mad at me right now? That little red X. There's a word that is a normal HTML word that I'm not allowed to use in JSX.
Class.
Hey! Oh my God, you guys are learning. This is amazing.
So random question, I know you don't use Tailwind, but does that change how people use Tailwind in React since you can't use class? Okay.
No, you just have to change the class name.
Okay, so you
It's
just
a
use the
syntax.
same thing. Got you.
By the way, you guys have spent a lot of time on the Firebase site. Check out how like not tied to any particular one visual representation of this site this hierarchy is. It's the semantics of the document without being like the look of the document. All right, and then I'm gonna, let's see, I don't care about the rest of these. Fine. Okay, and that's the thing to add a module. How long is that? Pretty long. Okay. All right, so the outer one is this. And then main is right there. Perfect. And the header. Those. None of this. None of this. I'll make that a UL. Make this a nav. And we'll close up that div, and then we should be good to go. Okay, so let's say I got all this HTML here. Mad about these classes and stuff, so I can just say everywhere where we have class equals, change that to class name equals. Yeah, cool. And didn't like that I didn't close closing tag for I. Didn't like that the image tag was single-ended. All right, it's good. Get rid of that. All right. So I'm going to give you this HTML. I'm going to post it in the thread for the Zoom link that I sent out. It is there. And I'm going to grab the CSS for you also. wonder if it'll let me just have all of them. There we go. Perfect. Oops, CSS is too long to post. All right. How I can get you this. God, did they just like get rid of snippets and shit? Where did this stuff go? There we go, found it. Okay, there you go. So I want you to take the HTML that I posted and you should put it in here in your app. Then I want you to go over your app CSS, delete all that shit, and copy in all the things that I just posted here. Doesn't need to be formatted or anything. Cool. And if you host that up, you should see some part of the app. Cool, perfect. So the thing that I want you to do is see if you can break this into some components. I'll show you what I mean. So like these little boxes right here, the 1, 2, and 3. If I were going to make those components, then shoot, maybe I should make them each their own components first. And go into that source directory, touch 1.js, 2.js, 3.js. Let's see if we can get that moved over to 1. So if I take all the stuff for 1 and paste it in here, and then make that one 1, import it in. Should still work. Hey, what do you know? It's still there. That's what I want you to do with the things that are on the page. See if you can bust those into components. Then, once you've done that, instead of having a 1, a 2, and a 3 component, see if you can figure out what's the same about these and see if you can use props to make the number change. But otherwise, have it be one thing. And also see there's a difference where like this one has an active class and this one doesn't. Play around. See what you can make happen. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to play with that, and then we'll touch base before we wrap. Who can tell me what we're doing?
Moving all the parts from the Flatiron site into their own components.
Hey! So maybe these links, maybe those go in there. Like the image is broken right now. See if you can swap it out for a different image. See if you can make all of this a component. Play around with it a little bit. F for at event listeners. That's pretty good. Weird, Jay. This is looking like the Google assessment now. Weird. All right, talk to me. What's making sense? What's not making sense? Some ahas, some head scratchers.
I'm just trying to figure out a way to just make one module node, kind of replacing your 1, 2, and 3, and try to use like a ternary or a while loop or something to render as many as we need, but not quite there. I'm trying to make a container first out of the like a module list out of that unordered list to stick it in.
All right. Anybody figure out how to make that modules thing dynamic?
Just pass in the number as a prop.
Yeah, I like that. So, all right, let's do the 1, 2, 3 way. Let's take a look at what that would be. Yeah, so if I just split all these into their own components. Cool, so that works. I'd even go as far to say as like, it's an improvement. We can certainly do better than this, but reads a lot better, that's for sure. Some differences between these. Let's fix the. All right. So if I wanted to make this dynamic, 3 things that I really need to give this. What are they?
You need to give it an href and a class name for on-click and on not on-click.
Yep. So whether, we can just say whether, we don't need to give the class name necessarily. We just need to tell it whether or not it is the one that is active. You can still keep the logic for how that gets done inside the component, but it needs to know whether or not it's active. It needs the href, needs some path for this, and it needs the thing that we're displaying. Well, we can give all of those as props. So we'll call this, I think it's on here, box link. Box link is what it's called in the actual app. So I'm going to make one called boxlink.js. And boxlink, I can start with just one of these. See, the only thing I wanted to do was make the number dynamic. Import boxlink from boxlink. So I call that like a display label or something like that. Just making that up. Cool. So you do something like that. And now, if I'm passing in display label, how do I use that over in this component? Who can tell me?
Squiggly brackets where the 1 is, and then this dot props dot display label.
Almost.
Oh.
Just props dot display label, right?
Yep.
We also need to pass props into 1 up on line 4.
I should also probably name the component correctly.
So
Cool. Why is
just
it props and not this dot props?
It's not a class, it's a function.
Because it's not a class, it's a function.
Why is it
Just
a
props.
function, not a class?
What was that, Jay?
Why is it a function and not a class?
So until we start talking about hooks, there's no way to put state inside of a function component. You can only have state in class components.
Okay.
Asterisks. But for right now, like that's a perfectly fine heuristic for whether or not something should be a function or a class. Does it have state? If it has state, it's a class. If it doesn't have state, it's a function.
just to make sure I'm understanding what I've seen in some of the videos, if you wanted to, in this instance, up on line 3 where you're declaring props as the argument there in BoxLink, could you put that in, could you replace props with display label and put it in curly braces and then just do display label there on line, what would that be, 7?
Yeah.
That's deconstruction, right?
Destructure.
Or destructuring.
It's
Do you
just,
need the dot, dot, dot?
oh, sorry. Nope, you don't.
Oh, okay.
Can't have it. Yep. It's just destructuring. It's not a special React thing. It's exactly the same destructuring worked in JavaScript. Yep, you can totally do that. In fact,
So in that case, do you only pass display label in as the prop? I don't understand. What's the difference?
This is exactly, that is just like doing this. That, this, and this are the exact same thing. It just does all of it in one go. And if I had multiple things, like we're going to need that URL, I can pull that out here also. And that would be like going, like that. That and that are the same thing. You can see, especially as we get like a couple of these, it ends up cleaning up the code kind of a lot. It's just a housekeeping thing. Or it could also be like doing it like, also exact same thing. You can just
Is there a
do
point?
it in the thing.
Is there a point at which it would be better to just do props and then like call on, like if there's like a lot of stuff you wanted to call on out of props, would that be better? Or because you could have like a really big like destructured object there at some point.
But then everywhere you're using those things, you're also adding props dot in front of all of it, which like you're just moving the noise around. And you could make a pretty strong argument for like, it's better to have the noise in the signature of the function than in the template. I'd buy that. If all that went over your head, don't worry about it. Yeah, we don't pass in props. We pass in just like attributes, just like regular HTML. And they're available on an object called props. And that's where we can use it. Really common mistake I see is people do this like JavaScript, like that. Stop it. It's more like an HTML attribute than it is a JavaScript statement. Cool, did it work? Well, they're all active, but I see a 1 and a 2 and a 3. They also all go to the same URL, but hey, we're getting some reusability. So now I can move that URL out here also. So this one is like that. Okay, so I got the URL being passed in now. That's going to be available on props.url. So I can make that props.url. I only had to change it in one place. Oh, it feels good, man. And then I also need to know whether or not it's active. So this one's a little bit advanced. That's not too bad though. So I could say something like is active equals true. Actually, I'm going to make that JavaScript true. Okay, so I say, all right, that one is active. So then that's going to be available on props.isActive. And what I can do here is stuff like, instead of having that string there, it looks like props.isActive. And then we can't do if statements, cannot do if statements, but we can do ternaries. So we can make that, if that's true, then that should be active. Otherwise, it should be null. Similar thing here, although the syntax is a little bit grosser. This turns into props.isActive. If that's true, it should be box length, all the stuff that's in here. Otherwise, it should just be box link, module link. And then same thing with this. This just becomes props.isActive. If that's true, the class name should be this big ass string. Otherwise, it should be null. And close that off. Unterminated JSX. I did something wrong.
Is it line 6 there? Your second div. You have a,
Correct.
Yeah.
Good call. Awesome. So now that conditional shit should work. And what do you know? It does. One last thing. All right, so I have this super flexible, badass component now. Super dynamic, and I can configure it, and I can make it do different things, and I can make it say different things, and link to different places, and have different classes, all with this. So the thing that TJ was talking about is, all right, well, how do I loop through that? Who can tell me?
I was thinking about making the UL like its own component, and then putting box link in there and doing some sort of ternary or while loop in there, like until 3.
We can do even better than that. Anybody else have any ideas?
Do you want to make it into state that you could pass
Totally
down
could.
instead? Okay.
Totally could put it in state. We don't need to though. We can just save it in a variable for right now. And the reason why is because it's not going to change. State is for things that might change.
Can't you just define a function where you map over it and then run that function?
Ding, 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 ding. So if I can turn this into data and map over it, one of the crazy fucking things you can do in these React functions is we can just write JSX anywhere. So if I do something like modules equals this array of objects, or it's got display label is whatever, and URL is whatever, and the is active is whatever. Okay, so I can represent that as data, you know, like it would come back from my database or something like that. Becomes 1, 2, 3, make that one true. And grab one of these URLs. All right, so I've got this data. I could do something like and for every one of these, I want to turn them into a box link. And then that becomes not one module.display label. That becomes module.url. And then is active becomes module.isActive. Cool. Then instead of all this, holy shit. We can really blur the line between JSX and JavaScript. I wonder if it works. Oops. Well, goodness gracious, there they all are. And if I were so bold as to, come on, man. Oh, there they are. I was making them. If I go into this app and, all right, well, I want more modules. Sure. It's a 5-module program. There they are. That's how component-based apps work. That thing in this object, weird. It's like that could come back from an API or something. And that's exactly how it works. All right, ask me some questions about components.
Is there a sort of best practices guide for how far you should break something down?
That is a subject of intense debate. I tend to like err on the side of fuck it, make it as small as you can. Like I've very literally done things like this, where we're taking one H1 thing and just wrapping it in a more descriptive component. I don't have any problem with that. There are other devs that are like, maybe like about a pages of HTML. I don't know. I feel like people get scared of components like they're expensive or they like cost money. Like components are free, basically free. So I wouldn't get shy about decomposing pretty far. At some point, you're doing more work than is necessary, and it's making it too hard to see what the relationship between these things is. That seems like a pretty good cutoff to me. And yeah, Kyle, that was totally a South Park episode. That was the one where they go really far in the future and they find United Atheist Front is in a religious war with the like Atheist Alliance or something like that.
Yeah, I'm remembering that one now that you mentioned it.
Great science. Cool. Other questions about components?
How much difference is there between the way you wrote it, like display header colon, properties? I mean, that essentially looks like you're setting a state. Like, what's the big difference there?
The big difference would be that this doesn't change. Modules is never anything else. It's just static data.
Okay.
If I were going to make this state, like for example, if I was actually getting this out of an API, be a good example. So we're not using these anymore. So I've changed this to a class component. And this return goes inside of a render method. I'm gonna do const, just saying that something equals. And really, since that changes, actually I take that back. That should go inside of this. All right, so if we're making module state, done. So the advantage of this is that I'm not going to hard code this in my app. It's going to start out as an empty array. And the state is going to change whenever the network request finishes and sets those modules.
If you were going to be hard coding in your data like you have it now, would you want to keep it pretty much where it is? Would you want to move that somewhere else?
If I was going to hard code it in, I would put it in the render method like that. Yeah. Other questions? Cool. If you want to keep on working on like the Firebase site, rock on. You can also check out the Google assessment. I'm pretty proud of that one. I worked hard on that shit. I had to recreate all of Google. So that's why it's not the real app. That one is this one. But that's not actually Google. That's your boy Kyle who recreated that shit from scratch, Forgery Club style, and made HTML and CSS for you to use. But problem is, it's all in one giant fucking component. So you can practice with tearing that one apart, practice the props, that kind of stuff also. Cool. Hopefully this is helpful. Cheers.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.